The first time I stepped into Grace Fellowship, I wasn't looking for salvation. I was looking for somewhere to belong. The world outside had grown colder, conversations thinner, friendships harder to hold. But inside that church, the air carried a different weight, like a place untouched by noise, heavy with silence and reverence. And standing at the front of it all was Pastor Daniel. Daniel wasn't the type of man you could ignore. His presence wasn't loud, but it was commanding in a way that drew the eyes of everyone in the room. His words came measured, delivered in a deep baritone that settled into the body more than the ear. His hands, when he spoke, carved shapes in the air as though guiding the congregation into a rhythm only he understood. I told myself my fascination was spiritual, that I admired his conviction, his ability to make hundreds of people feel seen at once. But the truth, even then, whispered differently. I found myself arriving earlier on Sundays, slipping into a seat where I could see his face clearly. The way light spilled through the stained glass always seemed to find him, tracing his jawline, catching in his eyes. He had a way of locking his gaze with strangers during sermons, as if speaking directly to them. When it happened to me, I felt exposed, as though he'd reached inside and found the questions I never dared to voice. After service, I lingered. I told myself it was to speak with other members, to learn their names, to let the walls of isolation crumble. But my steps always carried me near him. He shook hands with everyone, his smile patient, his words warm. When my turn came, his grip was firm, steady, and for just a second longer than necessary. His eyes lingered, curious, as though searching for something behind mine. "First time here?" he asked. "Yes," I managed, though the word came softer than I intended. "Well," he said, still holding my hand, "you're welcome here. Truly." It was a simple exchange, but I carried it home like a secret. That night, his voice echoed in my head, the weight of his gaze refusing to fade. I told myself it was admiration, maybe even the stirrings of faith. But beneath that excuse, a dangerous current had already begun pulling me under. Weeks turned into months, and I became a fixture at Grace Fellowship. I joined Bible study groups, helped with Sunday preparations, stayed late to arrange chairs and tidy hymnals. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. "You're dedicated," he said one evening as I stacked chairs in the fellowship hall. "I just want to help," I replied. He smiled, folding his arms as he leaned against the doorway. "We need more people like you. People who don't just attend but give of themselves." Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. It wasn't just gratitude, it was acknowledgement. And for someone who'd been invisible in so many rooms, that acknowledgement felt intoxicating. Soon, our paths crossed more often. Sometimes he asked about my week, other times about my family. He had a way of listening that made every answer feel important, even when I stumbled through half-thoughts. I learned he was a husband, a father, a man who carried not only scripture but responsibility. That knowledge should have drawn a line in the sand, a boundary I wouldn't dare cross. Instead, it sharpened the thrill of standing near him. The church wasn't merely a sanctuary anymore. It became a stage where every glance, every word between us carried a hidden weight. His hand brushing my shoulder during prayer lingered a moment too long. His laughter in conversation seemed pitched only for me. And when he spoke from the pulpit about temptation, about the frailty of the human heart, I swore I felt his eyes flicker toward me. Guilt gnawed at me. At night, I prayed for clarity, for deliverance from thoughts that pressed at the edges of my faith. Yet when morning came, I returned, drawn not only to the word but to the man who carried it. My chest ached with a hunger I could neither name nor silence. It was after a late Bible study one Wednesday that the air between us shifted. Most had already left, their chatter fading into the parking lot. I remained behind, collecting stray Bibles from the tables. Daniel walked over, his footsteps unhurried, his presence filling the quiet room. "You work too hard," he said softly. "I don't mind," I replied, not looking up. My hands trembled as I closed the book in front of me. He stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne reaching me before his words did. "Still, you should rest. Even God rested." I finally looked at him. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it felt unbearably small. His eyes held mine, steady, unflinching, as if searching for something I wasn't sure I wanted him to find. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed heavy, filled with everything we couldn't say. My pulse quickened, my breath caught, and I felt a dangerous truth stir between us, one neither prayer nor restraint could smother. Then, with a quiet smile, he broke the moment. "Good night," he said, turning away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. I stood frozen, the empty room spinning with the weight of what had almost happened, or perhaps what had already begun. That night, sleep never came. I replayed every word, every look, every charged second of silence. I told myself I was imagining it, that his kindness was nothing more than pastoral duty. But deep down I knew. Something had shifted. And no matter how much I prayed, no matter how fiercely I tried to deny it, I couldn't escape the truth. I wanted him. And worse, I couldn't walk away. The days that followed carried a strange heaviness, like I was walking through air that had thickened. Every time I entered Grace Fellowship, I felt Daniel's presence before I even saw him. His sermons continued as always, measured, inspiring, commanding the hearts of everyone present. Yet for me, each word seemed to lean toward something personal, as if he spoke less about scripture and more about the restless war inside me. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was grafting meaning onto his words because of my own weakness. Still, the way his eyes lingered during prayer, the slight curve of his smile when I answered a question in study group, the careful way he positioned himself beside me during church duties, all of it stacked into something undeniable. It was during a Saturday outreach event that the disruption truly began. We were setting up tables in the courtyard, arranging food for families in need. I reached for a stack of crates just as he did, and for a fraction of a second, our hands touched. The contact was brief, accidental even, but heat rushed through me like fire spilling across dry grass. He looked at me then, not away, not politely, but directly, steadily, as if acknowledging the spark neither of us dared name. "Careful," he said quietly, his hand withdrawing slowly. "Don't strain yourself." The words were ordinary, but his tone carried an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. My chest tightened, and I quickly busied myself, desperate to hide the color rising in my face. From that moment, I began noticing the small, deliberate ways he drew closer. He would stop me after gatherings, asking questions about my week that stretched into long conversations. He offered guidance not just in scripture but in the shadows of life I rarely let anyone see. My loneliness, my uncertainty, the hollow ache of belonging that first brought me to his church. His advice was measured, tender, but the way he listened, head tilted, eyes fixed, body leaning just slightly toward mine, blurred the lines between pastoral care and something more intimate. One evening, after most of the congregation had left, I remained in the hall to finish folding chairs. Daniel approached, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed me one, his fingers brushing mine as he did. "You've been working hard," he said. "Sit with me for a while." We sat across from each other at a long table, the room empty except for us. His presence filled the space, commanding yet strangely vulnerable. "You ever feel," he began, staring into the steam of his cup, "that people expect you to be stronger than you are?" I hesitated, unsure if he was asking as a pastor or as a man. "All the time," I admitted. His eyes lifted to mine, searching, holding me in place. "It's not easy, carrying what others expect of you. Sometimes you want to be seen, not as a leader, not as a role, but just as yourself." I felt the confession land heavy between us, more intimate than anything he'd spoken in a sermon. For a long moment, the silence stretched, not empty but charged. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breath shallow. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, but fear pinned me in place. Fear of what it would mean, of who might walk through the door, of the consequences written into the vows he had already made. Instead, I whispered, "Yes, I know that feeling." He gave a small nod, his lips pressing into a line that was neither smile nor frown. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. "You remind me I'm human. Sometimes I forget that." The word struck me with both warmth and dread. I knew then that we were no longer on safe ground. This was no longer a pastor and his congregant. This was something fragile, dangerous, pulling us both into a place neither of us could justify. Over the following weeks, our exchanges became subtler yet sharper. During services, his hand brushed against mine when passing communion. During meetings, his eyes would find me across the room, holding longer than they should. Once, when the room grew too crowded, he leaned close, his shoulder pressing against mine, his breath grazing my ear as he whispered directions. The proximity left me reeling long after he'd stepped away. I prayed harder, desperate to silence the stirrings that grew stronger with each passing day. Yet prayer only seemed to sharpen the conflict. Each plea for clarity made the longing heavier, not lighter. My nights stretched restless, haunted by what I wanted but dared not name. The turning point came late one evening after a midweek service. Rain poured outside, the kind that kept most people lingering indoors. The sanctuary emptied slowly until only a few stragglers remained. I offered to lock up, and Daniel stayed behind with me, his umbrella resting by the door. The lights were dimmed, the pews casting long shadows across the floor. As I gathered hymnals, he approached quietly, his presence stirring the air before he spoke. "You shouldn't have to walk home in this," he said. "I don't mind the rain," I answered, though my voice shook more than I intended. "I'll drive you," he offered. I turned to face him, words failing me as I caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't the distant, pastoral warmth he offered everyone else. It was raw, conflicted, filled with something neither of us had permission to feel. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of us, the sound of rain hammering against stained glass, the heavy silence pressing between our breaths. Then he stepped back, drawing in a sharp breath, as though reeling himself away from the edge of something irreversible. "Let me at least wait with you," he said softly, his tone a compromise between desire and restraint. We sat together in the dim light, neither speaking, both aware of the storm inside that mirrored the one outside. When my ride finally arrived, he walked me to the door. His hand brushed mine again. An accident, perhaps, or perhaps not. The contact lingered, electric, before he withdrew. "Good night," he said, voice thick, eyes unreadable. I stepped out into the rain, heart pounding, knowing the truth I could no longer ignore. A boundary had already been crossed, even without words or declarations. And I sensed, with equal parts fear and exhilaration, that this was only the beginning. The night of the rainstorm stayed with me like a secret carved into my skin. I replayed every glance, every brush of Daniel's hand, every pause in his voice. What once could be excused as imagination was now undeniable. Something lived between us, unspoken but alive. From that night onward, our meetings carried a new weight. The air thickened whenever we shared the same space. A casual greeting felt charged, a conversation stretched thin with tension. Each smile carried shadows. Each silence held words neither of us dared to speak. The congregation saw none of it. To them, Daniel remained the steady pastor, guiding with scripture and charm. To me, he had become a man divided. His prayers thundered from the pulpit, but when his eyes found mine, I saw a storm he could not control. I tried to pull away, convincing myself that distance would break the spell. For a week, I arrived late to service, slipping into the back pews, avoiding eye contact. But Daniel noticed. He always noticed. After one such service, he caught me by the exit, his hand gently closing around my wrist. "Are you avoiding me?" he asked, voice soft but edged with something urgent. I froze, the hallway empty but for us. "No," I lied, though the heat of his touch betrayed me. He searched my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin before he withdrew. "Don't," he whispered. Then he was gone, leaving me shaken, heart pounding against ribs that could no longer contain it. After that, avoidance was impossible. He drew me into moments only we understood, words layered with double meaning, gestures hidden in plain sight. When he preached about temptation, his gaze lingered on me as though confessing to the entire room. When he spoke of love, the corners of his mouth curved in ways that felt private, secret. It wasn't long before words were no longer enough. One evening, after choir practice ended and the church emptied, I lingered to tidy hymnals. Daniel entered quietly, his steps deliberate. He closed the sanctuary doors behind him, the sound echoing in the hollow space. "You stay so late," he said, approaching the front pew where I stood. "I don't mind," I replied, though my voice trembled. He stopped close enough for me to smell the faint musk of his cologne. His eyes searched mine, his face shadowed by conflict. "This isn't right," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "I know," I said, though my body leaned closer, betraying my words. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, heavy with restraint. Then his hand reached for mine, hesitantly, like a man crossing a threshold he swore he never would. His fingers curled around mine, warm, steady, trembling faintly. The touch shattered everything. The dam we had built with prayer and denial collapsed in that single gesture. We stood there, hands entwined, knowing we had stepped into forbidden territory. That night was not the last. What began as fleeting touches grew into secret meetings. We found excuses to linger, Bible studies that stretched too long, errands that placed us side by side. Each moment fed the hunger that had been smoldering between us. Soon, the secrecy became both thrill and torment. We lived in coded glances, shared silences, and brief touches hidden from the eyes of the congregation. He would pass me notes during meetings, short phrases like "stay after" or "I need to see you." My chest would tighten at the sight of his handwriting, the promise it carried. Yet every secret came with its cost. Guilt gnawed at me in quiet hours. I prayed for release, begged for strength, but each prayer circled back to the same truth. I did not want to let go. Daniel was married, bound by vows spoken before God and his family. I was complicit in tearing at those vows, yet the thought of walking away felt like tearing out a piece of myself. The duality consumed us both. On Sundays, Daniel thundered about righteousness, fidelity, purity of heart. By Wednesday evenings, he sat beside me in hushed corners, our hands brushing under the table, our knees touching beneath the cloth. The hypocrisy hollowed him. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. But the desire, our desire, pulled us back together every time. Suspicion began to stir among others. Once, after a study group, a woman named Ruth eyed me curiously. "You and Pastor Daniel seem close," she said, her tone light but her gaze probing. My throat went dry. "He just checks on me," I managed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "He's a good man. A family man." The words landed like stones. That night, I lay awake, wondering how long before whispers turned into questions, and questions turned into truth. Still, I could not stay away. One late evening, Daniel invited me to his office. The church was quiet, empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He closed the door behind me, his face drawn, weary. "I can't keep doing this," he said, voice breaking. My chest tightened. "Then stop," I whispered, though the thought of it shattered me. He looked at me then, his eyes raw with conflict. "But I can't stop wanting you." The words broke through every barrier we had left. He stepped closer, his hands trembling as they found mine. The kiss that followed was urgent, desperate, born of months of silence and denial. It was wrong, and yet in that moment, it felt like the only truth that existed. When it ended, he pulled away, breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine. "We've crossed a line," he said. "I know," I whispered. "And I don't regret it." The room fell silent, the weight of our choices pressing down on us. For the first time, the facade of restraint had been stripped away. What remained was raw, undeniable, and dangerous. We parted that night with no plan, no clarity, only the knowledge that we could no longer return to who we had been before. And as I stepped into the cool night air, my heart racing, I knew the storm was no longer coming. It was already here. The kiss in Daniel's office became the point of no return. After that night, there was no pretense left between us. We met in secret, behind closed doors, in shadows where no one could see. What had begun as subtle touches grew into stolen hours, each meeting a desperate attempt to silence the ache we carried when apart. At first, the secrecy thrilled us. Every whispered word, every brush of skin, carried the rush of danger. But desire has a way of demanding more. The brief touches were no longer enough, The glances across crowded rooms became unbearable reminders of what we craved. We were no longer fighting temptation, we were feeding it. Daniel bore the weight of our affair in every aspect of his life. I saw it in his sermons, his words cracking under the strain of hypocrisy. He spoke of fidelity, of loyalty, of the sanctity of vows, but his voice faltered, his eyes darted. To the congregation, it was passion. To me, it was confession. And though guilt etched itself into the lines of his face, he could never bring himself to let me go. The first real threat came one Sunday afternoon. After service, as people mingled in the courtyard, Ruth approached me again. Her voice was casual, but her eyes carried sharpness. "You've been spending a lot of time here," she said, her smile tight. I forced a laugh. "I volunteer where I can." She tilted her head. "It's good you're so dedicated. Pastor Daniel appreciates loyalty. His wife too, I'm sure." The words hit like a blade cloaked in velvet. My throat tightened, my chest hollowed. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long before rumors became accusations. Daniel felt the shift too. In his office, he paced, his face pale with worry. "People are starting to notice," he muttered. "If anyone suspects," he trailed off, his hands trembling as they raked through his hair. "We've been careful," I said, though even as I spoke, I knew the lie in it. "No secret can remain hidden forever." He stopped, turning to me, his eyes burning. "I can't lose everything. My family, my congregation, they're my life. And what am I?" The question left me before I could catch it, raw and trembling. His expression faltered, the weight of it pressing against us both. "You're the one thing I can't resist." The words should have comforted me, but they only deepened the wound. Being irresistible wasn't the same as being chosen. The pressure mounted. Our stolen meetings grew shorter, more frantic, driven not by freedom but by fear. Every knock at the door startled us. Every glance from the congregation felt like scrutiny. Yet the harder it became, the more tightly we clung to each other, as though distance would destroy us. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Daniel had asked me to meet him in the fellowship hall after everyone left. I arrived to find him sitting alone, head bowed, hands clasped tightly in prayer. When he looked up, his eyes were red, his face drawn. "We can't do this anymore," he said, the words brittle. My stomach dropped. "You don't mean that." "I do," he insisted, though his voice wavered. "It's wrong. It's destroying me. It's destroying you. If this comes out—" He stopped, choking on the words. I stepped closer, my voice breaking. "Daniel, I love you." The confession hung heavy, unplanned, undeniable. For a moment, silence swallowed us whole. Then his hands covered his face, his shoulders shaking. "You don't know what you're saying," he whispered. "I know exactly what I'm saying." My chest ached, but my voice steadied. "You can keep pretending this is temptation, weakness, sin. But it's more than that. It's real." He dropped his hands, eyes glistening, torn between denial and truth. Then, in a broken voice, he said, "If it's real, then it can't survive here." The words sliced through me, cruel not in intent but in necessity. His love, if it was love, was a flame caged by duty, by the image he fought to protect. We stood in silence, the storm of months of secrecy roaring between us. Finally he reached out, his hand brushing my cheek, trembling. "You deserve someone who can love you without shame." I caught his hand, pressing it against my face. "I don't want someone else. I want you." Tears filled his eyes, but he pulled his hand away, stepping back into the shadows. "Then you'll have to let me go." The words ended us. Not with a fight, not with exposure, but with surrender. I left the hall that night broken, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The church that once felt like sanctuary now loomed like a prison. The man who had filled my nights with fire had left me with ashes. In the weeks that followed, Daniel distanced himself. His messages grew louder, his smiles broader, his attention carefully scattered among the congregation. To anyone watching, he seemed restored. To me, every glance that avoided mine was another wound. I stayed away from Grace Fellowship, unable to bear the sight of him standing where we had begun, speaking words that no longer rang true. At night, I still heard his voice, felt the weight of his hand in mine, replayed the kiss that had marked our undoing. I knew he had chosen his family, his congregation, his image. And I, the man he couldn't resist, had become the shadow he had to bury. Yet even in the hollow of loss, I couldn't bring myself to hate him. Because what we had, however forbidden, however fleeting, had been real. It had been love, even if it could never survive. And as I walked away from the church for the last time, I carried both the wound and the memory. Some loves are sermons that last a lifetime. Others are secrets whispered in the dark. Daniel was both.